Great. I'm Frank Morales.
And where are you from?
I live near Elgin, Illinois.
Okay. Wonderful. Peggy, do you want to introduce yourself?
Peggy Hubel. I'm from California, the Bay Area.
Okay. David, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yes, I'm from Australia, the southern part of Australia, David.
And we're so glad you came all the way from Australia to join us.
Well, this is a long trip.
Yeah. And it's very early in the morning there. And David's got to go to work, so he's not going to be able to stay for the whole thing.
Was looking for her beginnings, you know. Who is this now?
Don't go away yet, Thomas, please.
These are all people.
Okay. Let's see. Who else do we have? Mary, you want to introduce yourself?
Oh, please. They won't
I'm
show
Mary
us.
Moore. I'm Mary Moore, and I live in Houston, Texas. And I'd like to know, how do you get this full screen?
These people have, they cannot hear me. They cannot.
Yes, they can.
They got
Yeah,
20
we can
people.
hear you. I'm not sure who just logged in. Somebody's saying they can't hear you, but we can hear you. And we just need you to move your camera down so we can see you.
It couldn't have been.
me?
good.
There you go. There you go.
That's us. We're the ones.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Well, welcome to the webinar. And who are you?
I'm Sandy Dunham, and
Where are
this
you?
is, we're in Aurora, Illinois. I met my friend Kathy Riddles, and I'm from Sugar Grove, which is just a little ways away from here.
Oh, wonderful. Well, I'm here in St. Charles.
Oh, okay.
So welcome.
So guest number 3 in the chat box said she's Elena Espinosa from Austin, Texas.
Oh, Elena Espinosa. Yeah, she's helping out with our How Not to Die. She's helping out Ricardo Basurto, who's out in Florida. She's helping him with this project. So, okay, who else? Ed.
Yeah, Ed Moskowitz. I live near Wheaton, Illinois.
If I'm gonna be in that, let me be.
Darling Diana.
Oh, I am your beautiful Parisienne from France. But I came from born in New Zealand, so I got an accent like David's from Australia.
And just so that everybody knows, Diana used to be our international secretary for the Theosophical Order of Service. Nancy Seacrest took over Diana's position, but Diana held it for about 20 years. And she is someone who is very close to all of our hearts. So I was overly joyed when she logged on, because I said, oh, we have a Diana on here, and suddenly her face showed up and I was screaming. So forgive me.
Thank you, thank you.
I'm a Diana Dunningham Shepperton groupie.
Hi, Ananya. Can you hear me now?
I can hear everybody. Can I just say who I'm a
Ananya,
groupie
can
of?
you hear me?
I can hear you. I don't know who's talking.
I'm guest number 3, Ellie Espinosa.
Oh, you're Ellie Espinosa.
Elena Espinosa.
Okay.
I'm here. Hi, Carol.
Carol, did you hear her?
You're muted, Carol.
Oh,
Elena was in, thank you,
Oh.
Ed. Elena was in Singapore.
I can't hear Carol very
Yes,
well.
Elena was in Singapore. Yeah.
yeah.
Diana, what did you want to say?
I can't
Are you
hear
talking
Carol
to me?
very well.
Okay. Carol,
Carol, we can't hear you too well, very well.
Okay, well, we'll when I have to do my little presentation part, we'll have everyone put their.
Carol got thrown off.
Hi.
You can't hear me?
No, I can hear you, but not very well. It's a little soft.
How about if I come really close?
That's
Like that?
better. That is better.
Okay.
Okay, so who else are we missing here? We've got 18 people on here. Carol, this is a record. All these people came to hear you.
They didn't know. I was-
Before you start, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, just want to say, Mary, how you doing? We're in Houston, but I haven't seen you for a long time. Mary Moore. Hello, everybody.
Hello.
Hello.
So,
Hello.
Van, did you want to introduce yourself?
Yes, my name is Van Lee from Houston Lot, Houston, Texas.
Yeah, and Van is on our board now for the TOS National Board. Peggy Hubel.
I'm in Austin, Texas. So hi.
Okay. All right. Who else have we got?
Dragona.
Oh, Dragunov. Yes.
Guest number 4.
Hi, I'm Dragana Narrative from Arlington Heights, Illinois. It's Chicago area.
Okay, did we get everybody? Let's see.
Rosie?
Oh, Rosie.
Rose.
Sorry, I can't see who's on here. This doesn't show me everybody.
There's a button in the top right that says people, and there's a list.
No, I know that. I know that. I was just looking for faces.
Yeah.
Hi guys, it's Rosie from Washington D.C. area. I'm gonna call out Kathy. You have to have Kathy introduce herself too.
Yes. So Kathy?
I've been called out, huh? This is Kathy. I'm from Denver, Colorado.
Hi, Kathy.
Kathy is our liaison coordinator for the Theosophical Order of Service. So if you have a Theosophical Order of Service group, please get in touch with Kathy because she's the person who coordinates all of that. And she sends out a newsletter.
Yeah, if you have a project, I'd love to hear about it.
So, okay. And then who do we have on the phone?
Swati, South Carolina.
Ah, yes, Swati. So tell us about you, Swati. You're a friend of Anil's, right?
Yeah, and I'm from Greenville, South Carolina.
Okay, all right.
Hi.
Well, welcome to the group.
Thank you.
Hey, see, I'm just checking. I've got so many guests, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then just some people's names.
You
So,
should have 18 people now.
yeah. Yep. Yep, that's what we've got. Okay, so I am going to hand this over to Carol because I am not doing this webinar, thank God. I did the last one, so, but I'm going to hand this over to Carol because this, she's going to do the presentation on self-love. Take it away.
Okay, I logged off and logged back on because my screen was doing weird.
Okay.
So
Can
you hear me okay?
Yeah, I do want to remind everybody to go ahead and mute your mics while Carol's talking, and then if you want to respond, just unmute your mic.
But I don't hear Carol very clearly. It's still kind of faded, sort of muted.
Right,
Let's
see if it makes a difference if we all mute our mics and if she brings her thing closer.
Yeah, and I can always get off video if I need to. Sometimes it's like that. So we have a little vignette from YouTube that we watched last time, and we're really basing all 4 modules of this webinar on that particular video. And it didn't really go very well last time, so Ananya sent a link, but Van has figured out a way for us to watch it easily. So Van, why don't we just go ahead and start with the video?
And Van, remember to unmute your mic, otherwise we won't be able to hear the video.
And then he was going to hold it up. We should be able to see it also. It worked before anyway. Yeah, I don't know why guest 6 is showing. They're muted, but I don't know where Van is.
One version.
There we go.
Splendid dark maid.
Van, we can't hear it.
Struggle. One cold evening, saw this little cat.
Van, the audio's not coming through. Oh, no, for some reason.
Creature wasn't virtuous.
We heard it there for a minute when it was close.
Right. Should I try doing the share screen, Carol?
It didn't really work before, did it? You know, it's already 20 after 2, so I think we're just going to have to skip the video this time. And I'll just talk about the point that I wanted to make. And maybe we can
Okay.
play with. Wait, maybe it's coming now?
No.
I think most of us already watched it, didn't we?
Yeah, well, I'm
Yeah.
hoping because I sent the link out to everybody.
Right. Yeah.
It
Yeah.
worked before, Van, so thank you for trying again, because it certainly worked before. So the video is really the story of the lion with a thorn in its paw and the compassion of a young man, instead of being afraid of the lion, of actually coming and taking the thorn out of the paw. And of course, you know, the later story of being pardoned from death and becoming friends with the lion. And as a metaphor, this is befriending the parts of ourselves that are in pain or suffering in some ways, that often there's something wrong and we don't know what. So we get grouchy at other people, we misdiagnose it, we're in pain, but we don't know why. So the title of the video is Why Self-Introspection is Important. And if we believe this, that it is important and we want to look at our sources of pain, my first question to the group would be, what is it that keeps us from doing that? Why don't we look at ourselves? Are there reasons why we tend to think it's something outside of ourselves instead of that it's something in us that maybe needs some healing?
So I'll start. My view is that, you know, when we try to look at ourselves, the image that we see doesn't match the good view we have of ourselves, and so we avoid that at all costs. We prefer our positive image of ourselves to the truth of the totality of who we are.
Okay, thank you, Ed. Yeah, sure. Any other thoughts?
I think sometimes it can be very painful.
It can be painful?
Yeah. Yeah.
Tell me
Just
tell
the
me what you
pain
mean.
involved in looking at the situations we're in that are causing those feelings. And that can be pretty painful to deal with.
Gotcha. Okay. Anil, are you trying to say something?
Yeah, is it possible that we just don't know where to look, that we are not aware that these are things that are bothering you that you just don't know about? That, like
So sometimes
Ed
it's that
said,
we don't even know.
that's what I meant.
Yeah, sure.
And I think that's true of most people. Most people do not look inside themselves at themselves.
Absolutely.
And there has to be some sort of impetus to that would allow us personally to look at ourselves. I don't believe people do that automatically.
Okay, it's not something we're taught in school. It's not necessarily a reflex that we have. It's something maybe we have to learn. Other ideas?
I would agree with what Peggy said about, we need some kind of impetus. Usually it's some kind of tragedy or some kind of event that happens in our life, or loss of some kind, that makes us actually take a step back and look at ourselves.
Mm-hmm. And if we use the analogy of the thorn in the paw, we get so used to having maybe a certain size of thorn, a certain level of pain, that it takes something even more than that to get us to really look at ourselves and say, gee, something has to change here.
May I say something?
Yes, Dragana.
It's Dragana. It's sometimes we see, but we think that there is no help actually. That there is it gets so big that we think that there is nobody who can help, and it takes time to start to believe that there is always some kind of help. And I don't know. It depends what it is and how big the burden is, how big the feeling is, whatever
Sure.
it is. Sometimes, people see, but they are closed. We close ourselves because we don't want to burden others, or we don't believe that others can help.
And if there's no help, then there's no reason to be looking at it. If it's hopeless, it's just kind of, why do you do that to yourself if you think it's hopeless? Absolutely.
Yeah.
Lots of times we believe what others have told us about ourselves. And that's particularly true if our parents have provided negative comments about our actions as we grow up. And these people are people that are supposed to care for us, and children believe what their parents and their relatives say about them. So if these things are negative, and even some positive things, and we believe that, why should we go any further? Why should we look inside? Because others have told us what we might take as the truth about ourselves.
Mm. Sure. I think I like your comment too, that sometimes even the positive things we're told, because if we're told you can do anything and then we can't do it, then that can set up a very negative story also, even if it sounds like a good thing.
I think the Theosophical Society has evolved considerably in the last 50 years. When I was a child in the Theosophical Society, it wasn't even acceptable to use the personal pronoun in lectures or in discussions. You didn't become personal. It was considered very tacky in the lower self. So we really only used a generalized moral exhortation of each other. We should be this and we should be that. So when I had problems of feeling humiliated, I didn't even recognize the humiliation. I didn't have any way of dealing with it, because all I did was sermonize myself, as I'd seen all around me in the Theosophical Society and in my own parenting. My parents were loving, but it was the moral exhortation. We have to be like the Knights of the Round Table, and brave and true and tender. And there wasn't a way, there were no techniques for acknowledging fear and embarrassment and all of that. It was just that you had to keep a stiff upper lip. And I remember when I first arrived at Crotona at the age of 23 or 4, I remember that it was still very much frowned upon to say I during a lecture, or even really in a discussion. It was sort of kept impersonal. So I think we've evolved tremendously, and I would say that the American section has been right out in front there in encouraging us to use all these humanistic psychologies that are now available. I think we've come a long way. And I'm still way behind because of that childhood reflex of just growling at myself and saying, I've got to be a better person.
Absolutely. And actually, I will tell you that there is someone at Crotona who, when I said I was going to talk about love, explained to me why there was no need for self-love, because there is no self anyway, and we are all one. And so, there is still that idea. And as an ideal, I absolutely understand that. I understand that there is no self. There is no me that is here suffering. But meanwhile, while I'm here suffering, I need to hear these kinds of things. I need to study these kinds of things. So this is actually a beautiful transition. We're told so many things as theosophists. I mean, kill out desire. They don't print it anymore, but Leadbeater had a pamphlet to those who mourn, basically saying don't. That if you're mourning somebody, you're disturbing them in the astral, that your grief is bad for them, basically. So you shouldn't be doing that we should be living these good lives. And the fact is, I don't measure up, and I don't know anyone who does. And that's the beauty in this, and the hope, really, for all of us, that people in church are sometimes called hypocrites. They go to church and then they're cursing at each other in the parking lot because they block or something like that. So to be realistic about trying to live the kind of life we want to, we have to start with where we are. We talked about conditioning last time, and Nanya led us in a beautiful discussion last month, looking at the conditioning that we have. And a lot of times the conditioning is unconscious and has been given to us in ways we may not be aware of. But we also condition ourselves through theosophy. And that gives us very high ideals.
Yeah, I was going to say that, we talk about the lower self and the higher self and so forth in theosophy, but you need that personal self in order to transcend, so to get to the higher self. We have to be human before we can become subhuman or superhuman.
Mm-hmm.
Because this is our playground. This is where we're learning it all.
Absolutely. Trungpa Rinpoche talked about the spiritual bypass. When instead of going through something like Dante had to, you go through the underworld to get up, instead of doing that, you go right to the I'm spiritual. And that really doesn't end up serving you in the long run, and it's not sustainable. Diana, were you saying something?
I'm really, really happy to hear you two saying what you're saying. I feel so much less guilty. When I watched the Androcles video, it didn't even occur to me. I was kind of stunned when the person telling the story said this is really a metaphor for looking within ourselves, because I never even, when I watched the story, when I read the play, George Bernard Shaw's version of Androcles, it never even occurred to me to look within. All I thought was, oh, wow, fancy that guy looking beyond the growling and seeing the pain within and in the other person. So I was already focused on seeing the fault in the other person, seeing the flaw, but also that feeling of compassion. I didn't even think about it as a metaphor for myself, which tells you exactly what you're saying, Carol, about this. We're not allowed to talk about the little self. We weren't when we were raised in the Theosophical Society.
Right. Well, and to help with another's pain is certainly what we're taught too. I mean, if we see somebody suffering, then we really need to aid with that suffering. Compassion is our job. So, Ananya, go ahead and put up the first slide, please.
Hold on, give me 1 second.
Okay.
Can everybody see it?
Yep.
Okay. Yeah. Yay.
So being raised in Theosophy, as several of the people on this webinar have been, this meant a lot to me. If your compassion does not include yourself, it is incomplete. Any thoughts about that quote?
Hal, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Yes, this ties in with that. I watched that video where he had that thorn in his paw, and an onlooker could misconstrue that and say the guy or the lady is mean and so forth, and that observation can take in wrong information, and then we judge a person. But if we're used to first examining ourselves and then we use that for other people, then we can see another person's pain. And until we are sensitive enough to feel other people suffering in their pain, well, we're fooling ourselves if we say we're somebody in the spirit. And there's no way to get to become a spiritual person except we go through the underworld to get up to the light. Because we first come down and then we level out on earth, and then the ego has to work itself out to for us to become the spiritual beings we were coming down. And people don't understand when they say to kill out desire, that's saying we don't need an ego. That is so much misinformation, because everything about us must be sublimated, not killed, because we were given everything we have to work toward the light, but it's got to be trained. And I can't have compassion for anyone if I first don't have it for myself, because the rule said, that golden rule said, love everyone else as you love yourself. So if I do not love myself, I can say I love somebody else all day long, but it will be a lie. And I might be so deluded and full of illusion, I might believe it, but it's not true. We have to be this. We have to love ourselves first. Then we can see ourselves in others and them in us. And if I'm compassionate toward myself, I'm compassionate toward you. And yeah, there's a lot of bad information out there. Thank you.
Thank you. Very well said. And to me, just if compassion includes everyone, then I'm in everyone also. So I'm not just here to be a pure tunnel of light at this point in my life. I believe it's possible. I believe it's an ideal. But at this point, if I'm not taking care of myself, if I'm not compassionate to myself, then I really don't know exactly how to do that for other people. So very well said. Thank you. So we have these kinds of ideas and ideals that we would like to live. And if you do the next slide, Ananya, what I say is we're trying to walk this razor's edge. You know, we've been told that it's a razor edge path. And what happens, though, instead of doing this joyfully and gleefully and, oh, I made a mistake, silly me, we get hard on ourselves. And when we're hard on ourselves, this actually activates our most primitive or reptilian brain. Next slide, Ananya. And our reptilian brain controls our threat response system. It is what tells us to engage in fight or flight. It is definitely overactive. Perhaps saying it's always on is extreme, but it is on because if we're not perfect, then we perceive that as a threat. If there's something wrong with us, everything is not okay. And so we tend to be overactive in perceiving threat. This shows up in just the anxiety disorders that we have, as well as depression, that these are symptoms of an underlying sense that something is wrong. Next slide. Evolving after the reptilian brain was the mammalian brain. And I just love this picture of the elephant and the woman, perhaps in India. Our mammalian brain tells us to be connected, tells us to comfort the young or whoever needs comforting, meaning our friends, our family, other animals. And it enables us in turn to know how to be comforted ourselves. And what tends to happen, I think a big reason we don't do self-introspection is because we don't have enough self-love. That we look inside and instead of comforting ourselves, we're critical. But we know how to comfort ourselves. And if a friend came to us and said, oh, I made such a mistake, I had a big fight with my friend this morning, and I know I was wrong, and I don't know what to do. We would hug her, we would comfort her, we would help her come up with a plan. And often, if we come to ourselves with a similar situation, I had a fight with a friend, I know I was wrong, I don't know what to do, we continue with, I'm a bad person, I'm a moron, very harsh words, often that we would never say to another person. Things just really, really unkind that we would never say to another person. So my idea today is just to bring that to light and not to judge that either. Next slide. So I ask, are we living as a reptile or a mammal? Now the picture of me, I don't know if you can tell in the background, that's a gorilla. Kind of hard to see, but
Oh, yeah.
I don't know that it's a yes or no question because we don't always live as either, but just as a shortcut and something kind of amusing, if somebody does something to us and we have a visceral reaction, to think, whoa, that was a reptile. Just, kind of a fun thing. Or if we're doing something kind and compassionate, instead of saying, gee, I'm acting like a Buddha or a Bodhisattva, I'm acting like a mammal, just makes it a little more fun. Next slide. So this is the question I would like to discuss, and it is a personal question. If you don't want to answer personally, but generally, that is absolutely fine. But I think it is very worth asking and very worth taking some time with after the webinar on your own. Are you mean to yourself? I know I am.
But I think there's a swing of the pendulum there. I'm very mean to myself, but I'm also very arrogant and self-assured at times. I mean, I swing between the two, and the more mean I am to myself, the more I swing to the other extreme of blaming others and saying I'm perfect. It's a funny thing. I think they go together somehow.
Well, that makes sense. There's really someone who is arrogant is generally hiding some kind of pain, maybe not hiding, but we want to think we're better because we think we're worse. But being right-sized is a very difficult thing to do, to really just be one among many, kind of normal, not that special. We don't really like that. I don't.
Really? Yeah, really.
Have you considered the impact of the internalized judge?
Yeah, go ahead. Keep talking.
Well, there's a superego at hand here many times. And a lot of times we've been exposed to that by internalized critical parents, first of all, growing up, and then it gets internalized where we do it to ourselves by self-shaming and, the internal critic. And then there's a lot of worthiness issues. It takes a while to shake that off. Quite a few years actually, to shake off that internalized critic before you feel worthy enough to start looking at yourself in a compassionate, tender, loving way. And I've just wondered if you thought about that perspective at all.
Yeah, actually, I did a presentation on this, and there was a lot about the judge and some very funny pictures where basically everyone's guilty. The accused is guilty, the other side is guilty. We're just all. It was just, I can't show you some of the pictures, but absolutely. And it is this judge that seems to be a default to get activated when we start looking at ourselves.
Oh, yeah.
So the awareness of that default is a big step in getting towards really being able to do it. And one of the barriers for me, I think, and maybe for other people, is that somehow self-love is selfish, is only if you're weak, it is stroking your ego, a lot of negative conversation about even having self-love. So it was interesting when I had someone telling me that there was no need for self-love and all these idealistic reasons. It was just like, but right now I am suffering, and This is something that is very useful for me, and I am very sure it is bringing me along the path of spirituality, and it is definitely a good thing. And I have since found some research, I'll summarize a little bit of it at the end, that that supports that actually it is certainly part of the spiritual path to have self-love.
Sir, we really need to study the difference between self-love and self-love, because we love ourselves first, selfishly. Then, when we come into the light and take the golden rule of do unto others as you would have them do unto you, whether they do it or not, because they won't, and to love your neighbor as yourself. When we begin to internalize that, and then when we were told to judge ourselves and not others, so when we judge that we're doing that, that's our teacher. And then we are teaching ourselves to be compassionate, to empathize with people, to judge righteously, that if a wrong is a wrong, don't sugarcoat it and call it something else, even if it's your child, and so forth, because if we're working on becoming truth, so that we can give it, well, then we have to judge ourselves. And then, like one said, I was arrogant. Well, we can't get out of arrogance until we realize that's what we are. But then we have tools that we can use against that. And we, physician, heal yourself. Well, that's where we, come into healing of ourselves, but we can't do it if we don't realize what it is that we need to do for ourselves so that we can apply it to others. And that is self-love with a capital S, I'll say. But that's not selfish. As soon as somebody say you need to love yourself, well, then that's your ego. And you da. But the common sense, and a lot of things just need common sense. There is love, and then there is love. And without that divine self-love, which is what it is, without it, well, we can't overcome that ego with the little e, which is what we have to lovingly try to be, to work in spiritual light, because we can't be here without one. So it's got to be a part of us, so that the spiritual man trains the natural man. And that's the self-love in me that trains the little selfish love that is in me. And then they work together. I can't kill them, that they're a part of me, but I can train it with divine intervention, that I can think righteous thoughts in doing that. And we can all do that. But we just have to be careful about people trying to cram in us that self-love means that you love yourself and nobody else, because that is wrong, and we'll always be stymied.
And I think it's certainly true that we do the self-introspection and look at ourselves. I think the word judge has some negative connotations for a lot of people, for some maybe not. So if we're looking with love, and we're not looking with the big whip and the big stick and you have to change. There's actually, Krishnamurti would say that you don't actually need to change it all, that you just need to look. I personally take it further and will try and look at underlying causes of why perhaps I'm doing a certain behavior or feeling defensive or whatever the issue is. But I also certainly know that it works. Just bringing that attention loosens things up. Whereas if we start fighting it, and I think there was a little talk of that in the video, as soon as you say kill out or I'm going to fight you, the part you're going to fight is going to fight back. So to just be able, instead of being mean to ourselves, to look at ourselves and with love and know that perhaps we can do something different. We don't even have to use the word better. But that maybe next time I would like to try this. Just holding things lightly and gently with ourselves.
I would like to add a comment about self-love or love in general. I've always had a problem with that word love. And I like the idea of having respect for myself, the same type of respect that I should have for other human beings and animals. And for myself, I've learned to think of the word agape or agape, a Greek idea or definition of love. And I think if we learn to have respect for ourselves and work on ourselves from that perspective, I don't think we have to worry about the comment of self-love. But that's just my perspective. That's my hang-up.
And thank you for sharing that, because words can certainly get in our way. And for us to learn about ourselves, and if love isn't the word that works, or, you know, the word God has so many different meanings. So use what works, use what feels right for you. My basic judge of if I'm kind of doing the right thing in the right place is I can feel my heart chakra open. I don't know if that's actually technically true, but I feel more love in my heart. It feels like something opening. So when that happens, it's like, okay, this is my way of knowing that this is something useful. So asking the questions, we meditate often just, you know, silently or perhaps to heal others, but to really spend some time looking at ourselves with love is something that isn't really necessarily built into practice per se. So I certainly have found it very useful, and not just, you know, we'll often do it, or I can't speak for everyone, but the trigger can be I'm angry, I'm sad, you know, that I'm having an emotion that is making me uncomfortable. But to do it consistently, perhaps at the end of the day, so that you're looking not just at what has triggered you, you're looking at the days you've been pretty neutral. You're looking at the days that you've done some things that have made you really happy. To not only sit down when we're judging ourselves in some kind of negative way.
I was going to say, Carol, that you know, I understand what Peggy's comment. I understand Peggy's comment because I hear that a lot. You know, when I'm on the Lifeline and you're talking to people about self-love, people have a difficult time with putting that word love and self together. And so one of the suggestions I was thinking is it possible that we can look at ourselves just without fear? You know, because there are two basic emotions. There's love and there's fear. And if you can do it without fear, without stepping away from it, but just really watching yourself. And I think that it helps resolve everything. Just as you mentioned, Krishnaji says that, you know, just watch. And don't back away from it, just watch it. But can we watch it without having any fear of it?
Oh, that's so useful. And really to truly listen. We'll talk about active listening next time. And part of this being able to do this is to have conversations like this without someone having to defend use of the word love because it works for them, or a different word because it works for them, that we're putting it out there and we're not afraid. And this is who we are. And that's okay. I think this is just a lovely example of doing it as a group. But to put yourself out there and talk about your foibles is a level of this lack of fear that I'm going to tell you, you know, something I've done that I'm not proud of or think I shouldn't have. And that's okay. I can put it out there and I'm not, you know, going to get my parents' disapproval or whatever we're afraid of isn't going to happen. And even if it does, we're strong enough to handle it.
I think that there are moments of grace in service when we're engaged in service activities, even if it's just to family and friends, or if we're in a TOS project. I think there are moments of grace when we sort of skip the self-love stage in a way in our problems at that level because we see the need greater than our own. And I think that's been my lifesaver in a way, is seeing the greater need and being so attracted to helping, somehow you can just a little bit step beyond your weaknesses. And I think that's possibly why I've been so attracted to the Theosophical Order of Service, because it was a natural, spontaneous way of going beyond that self-judgment business.
No, that's beautiful, and that's really the person talking to me about that there really wasn't a need for self-love. You gave a very good example of that, because in that moment there isn't a self. There's just taking action in something, the effortless effort of being of service when there's a need. That's a beautiful example.
You know, I was in the we have a lot of violence in France here. I'm in the suburbs of Paris, and we take suburban trains into Paris. And in our particular area where we live, there's a lot of, it's like 90% immigrant, and a lot of poverty and a lot of violence and drugs and so on. And I was in the train once, and there was a typical incident where there was a guy just out of it, violent and yelling and just kind of crazy. And people were shrinking back as usual and trying to pretend they couldn't see him and trying to get away. I was too far away to intervene, but I was close enough visually to see this guy who was just standing about 2 yards away step forward and say to this guy, "Oh my God, how lovely to see you here. I'm so happy to see you here. How are you?" And it just like riveted everybody in the train. And there was this guy, I thought, well, he must be a friend or something. But he just saw only this, it was like he just met his best friend, whereas in fact he wasn't. The chap who intervened was seeing a guy in great distress, but he saw him as somebody just wonderful, just like it was his best friend. And it transformed the man who was in violence. He'd never been given such love just poured upon him. He was in such distress, really deep down, and it was just transformative. He just stopped and just started, like, it just blew him right out of the violent, out of control, spaced out stage, and just started replying to this guy, well, hi, and started telling him what was really wrong. And it was just the most mind-blowing experience. I haven't been able to do that myself in other occasions since, but it's always been there as this amazing inspiration. It wasn't sort of like he was acting the guy, it was genuine. It was just amazing. It diffused a very potentially bad situation.
But it probably also changed the environment of the train as well. For all
Totally,
the people who are shrinking away. Yeah.
Totally.
So I suggest that we all do that for ourselves. Come to ourselves and say, "Hi, how are you? I really care. I really want to know." Just with that beautiful genuineness, you know, it works with everyone, including ourselves, to be just that happy to see ourselves, even when we're ranting and raving and perhaps violent. Now, and of course,
I'm agree that always happy, love yourself, and love the people around you.
and I think you do that from the little I know of you.
Yeah, we hear that a lot, Van, about you.
Yes, I know it's true.
Well, let's go. I'm to the next slide, Ananya. We're getting to be out of time. So I told you I had done a little research on self-compassion or self-love. To use the word self-compassion, this is Catherine Neff in her work. So the first thing is that self-compassion is not selfish or weak. This is interesting. If we aren't compassionate to ourselves, we tend to be more judgmental of others. So it just makes sense, as above, so below, as without, so within, that if we're telling ourselves how we should be different and better, then we're doing that to other people. And that makes for a very unhappy life when you really want everyone outside to behave. And my experience is they don't. They have their own business, their own agendas, their own things to do. They're not really too concerned with what it is I want and how I want the world to be. So if I can stop judging them, then I believe that helps me to stop judging myself. And as I stop judging myself, it makes me easier on them. So it's just a wonderful upliftment, actually, for the person doing it as well as the world around them. Just becomes lighter. And because of this, when we're judging ourselves and others, we're really not radiating full love to the world, which is one of my goals and certainly one of the goals of Theosophy. So go to the next one, Ananya. And we talked about this a little bit, that self-love, it's not vanity, it's not selfish, it's not these negative things. That compassion for all beings includes this being too, and it is unconditional love for ourselves and for others. And is there one more, Ananya? Oh, Kirsten, I said Catherine. Her name's Kirsten Neff. So
Kristen.
the three...
Kristen.
Yeah. The three main elements is having self-kindness versus self-judgment. So we see things, but we don't have to put a label on them or compartmentalize them. We can just see them as for what they are. Her second one, and there's a whole expounding of this, but we just don't have time, but a sense of common humanity versus isolation. So part of what this means, I can't explain it fully, but right now, but that we are flawed and so are other people. We do things we don't want to do, and so do other people. That as we see things that we maybe want to change or think we should change or just make us unhappy, that we realize that we are not the only ones that do this. That often, because other people don't verbally berate themselves in public, usually the arrogance comes across in public, and the putting yourself down is what we do in private. So we don't see it, so we think we're the only ones doing it. In 12-step programs, they call it judging our insides by other people's outsides. So what we see outside is certainly not the whole story. So getting this idea that we have this in common, that we all have a variety of traits and that we're not alone in any of them. And then the last element that she lists is mindfulness versus over-identification. And so I think Diana's example of someone just going up to someone perhaps without even thinking about it and recognizing the humanity in him and just being in that mode of service, as TOS encourages us to be and certainly gives us opportunities, that when we're in that mindfulness, when we're really just noticing life and noticing what's happening, that we're not over-identifying with it. Because actually over-identification is something from the past. We are American, we are man or woman, we are particular religion, ethnicity, all of these things that we identify with. Whereas when we're really mindful in the moment, none of that matters. We see a need and we take care of it. We're hungry and we eat. We don't judge it. We, get in the car and do what we need to do without having to overthink or over-identify. So that's the last slide. It's about time, but I'd like to, if there's any final comments, I'd certainly like to hear them.
Oh, I can see Rosie. Posey, hello.
Now that the screen is gone, yeah, we can see each other again.
Wow.
Thank you. Yeah.
I just wanted to add having sense of humor, in those critical times, just not to take ourselves too seriously, to somehow try to find something funny or something, using that way to make that step back. I don't know if it makes any sense.
No,
Yeah, it does. It does.
Yes.
Look at Diana. She's laughing all the time. She's always laughing.
I think that is part of the gentleness with ourselves, instead of judging, to say, there I go again, to be kind of amused with ourselves. That, gee, I really didn't want to eat that second piece of cake, and I sure did, instead of getting,
And it was
getting out of
good.
the big one. Yeah, right.
Excellent, Ananya. You wicked girl. Tell us what the next theme is for the next time, Ananya.
So the next part of the series is on active listening. And actually, Carol's going to be presenting that as well. So this was actually Carol's idea. This whole art of living came up because of Carol. She came up with the video, and then when we were brainstorming, we thought she was going to do the whole thing, but then she's like, no, I don't want to do all of it. And so Peggy and I chipped in, but Carol got the majority of it.
Yeah, I think it's nice to have different people.
Huh?
It's nice to have different people
Yeah.
participating.
And then Anya, what day will that be on?
It's
November?
it's the first Sunday in November, which will be November 4th. So, and we will not be having daylight savings time any longer. We are going out of daylight savings time. So I need to make sure that I put standard time on the notice. So, but it'll be at 4 o'clock like it was tonight or today. So, yeah, so if you could just add it to your calendar, and if you can make it, that'd be wonderful.
Just can I ask, is there anybody there's 15 of us online right now. Is there anybody who hasn't said anything who kind of wants to say something? I'm a bit frustrated.
अनिल कधीच निघाला म्हणे तो म्हणला इट इज नॉट व्हॉट आय एक्सपेक्ट मला पण नाही आवडलं मला माहित नव्हतं कसं करायचं.
Kathy, did you have anything to say?
You know, I did just this morning. I read this story about an amazing kindergarten teacher who had this class she taught kindergarten for years and years, and she's currently 96 years old. But one of the things she had in her classroom was what she called a magic mirror. It was a full-length mirror, and she had it in a cupboard with the door closed. And whenever a child was feeling bad about themselves or feeling embarrassed or just feeling crummy about themselves in some way, she would take them over to the cupboard and open up the door and have them look in the mirror. She told them all that it was a magic mirror. She would keep her hand on the child's shoulder at all times, and she would say, look at yourself. Can't you see how wonderful you are? How could you have forgotten how wonderful you are? And she said just standing there and the child would look in the mirror and it would just all melt away. And she used the magic mirror for years and years and years. Eventually it was so popular that she made a lot of the magic mirrors, and they had an inscription around the wood frame, you know, just talking about, I can't remember exactly what it said, but it was a lovely affirmation. And I thought that was a really cute idea.
There's so many adults who need that done, not just children. Good grief.
Well, yeah, she still
You
has
should put one in the TOS office. Here's your closet. Here's your full-length mirror.
Yep.
Except for those of us who are senior citizens and covered in wrinkles, that's a pretty disastrous recipe.
You look really good on camera, Diana. Don't you see?
But I've got my hands here because hey, look, I'm pulling the wrinkles back. If I take my hands away, you'd be horrified.
I have to tell you something. So I saw Diana in March earlier this year. She looked absolutely phenomenal. And she had more energy than I did. So she's so self-deprecating, and she's all full of beans. She does. She looks absolutely beautiful. She looks happy and active and vibrant, and she's just beautiful. And I'm not being prejudiced whatsoever.
And Nadia,
She's
will
just
you
that
marry
way.
me, darling? Will you marry me, please?
You're already married.
My husband is dying to come and say hello in French to you. Can he do that? Just say hello?
Yes, please.
Bonsoir.
Ah ben voilà. Bisous, I kiss you.
Bend down.
And all.
Can you say hello? Oh, snuggle close to your wife, Michelle. What's wrong with you?
Kisses from Paris.
He's saying kisses from Paris. Did you hear him?
Wow.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you for letting him do that. He's so excited to be seeing the webinar, you see.
Have a good day.
Yes,
Have a good
and
evening.
Have a good evening. Are there any final comments?
I just have a comment. Sandy from Sugar Grove. I am this first time I've sat in on one of these, and it's been very interesting, productive. I guess I have the thought that our families of origin seem to be where we get that self-esteem from. And, if we haven't examined it as we age, we probably stay right where we were when we were a young child. If we haven't tried to better ourselves or, make that self-esteem come up to where it should be. And I'm a former teacher, so I think we all know what that's like when you see the student that doesn't have self-esteem, and you know how much they thrive when it gets better. So we have an obligation to ourselves to make that better. And sometimes it might be counseling or sharing with other people and just sharing our experience, because we grow from each other. And when there's pain there, there's growth taking place. So that's just an observation. So if you felt pain in that self-esteem department, you probably have had some growth.
Yeah, that is very.